Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're tuning in today. Look, if you're in the C-suite, if you're a strategic leader, or really just someone tasked with navigating the absolute tidal wave that is artificial intelligence right now, this explainer was built specifically for you. Today, we're stripping away all the hype to look at the unvarnished, genuine economic realities of the AI industry. We're going to talk about capital efficiency, infrastructure risk, and a very real looming macroeconomic transition. Let's dive in. And that brings us directly to the core dilemma literally every executive is facing right now. Are we in an AI bubble, or are we standing at the edge of a new industrial revolution? It's a tough call, right? Because on one hand, we're seeing technological capabilities that genuinely rival a new era of industrialization, but on the other hand, we have these massive, completely unprecedented capital expenditures that have top investors seriously sweating. The real question is, how do you balance the undeniable promise of AI with the strict, absolute need for responsible capital allocation? So here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with Section 1, the enterprise reality check. Then Section 2, the capital efficiency dilemma. Section 3 covers the anatomy of an AI bubble. Section 4 tackles the productivity labor shift. And finally, Section 5, policy for a post-AI age. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the enterprise reality check. Right off the bat, we're looking at a pretty stark contrast in the market today. On one side, we have technological certainty. According to industry leaders like Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei, the scaling laws of AI are historically proven at this point. It's almost mathematical. You put more compute and more data in, and the models get predictably smarter at coding, at science, law, finance, you name it. But on the exact opposite side, we face massive economic uncertainty. Yes, we know the models are getting smarter, but the timeline for when actual enterprise revenue will catch up to these massive costs, that is highly, highly volatile. Now, you might be wondering why investors are willing to stomach all that uncertainty. Well, Anthropic actually serves as a great barometer for enterprise AI right now. Their revenue was $100 million in 2023. Fast forward to 2024, it hit $1 billion. And for 2025, they are projecting somewhere between $8.5 and $10 billion. I mean, that is a staggering 10x year-over-year revenue growth. The raw economic momentum currently underway is just undeniable. But as we're about to see, that kind of growth comes with an incredibly steep price tag. Which brings us to Section 2, the capital efficiency dilemma. The absolutely crucial thing to grasp here is what insiders call the cone of uncertainty. Think about it. When you have revenue jumping 10x a year, forecasting the future becomes incredibly tricky. Is next year's revenue going to be 20 billion, 50 billion, 100 billion? You just don't know for sure. So this cone of uncertainty represents the widening gap between those highly unpredictable future revenues and the very immediate, very massive capital expenditures required today to build the data centers that will eventually support them. So why can't these companies just wait and see how the market shakes out? Well, they can't because of the infrastructure lag time. It's a huge bottleneck. At month 0, you have to commit massive amounts of capital. Then it takes at least 12 months just to build the physical data center facilities. And realistically, you're often looking at 24 months before that compute power is fully online to actually serve your projected revenue. Essentially, executives are being forced to make multi-billion-dollar financial bets practically blind, years in advance. And that setup creates an incredibly high-stakes tightrope walk. On one side of the ledger, if you try to play it safe and buy too little compute, you won't be able to serve your customers, and you'll just bleed market share to your competitors. Game over. On the other side, if you buy too much compute and that revenue cone lands on the lower end of expectations, you risk catastrophic financial overextension or even bankruptcy. It is all dictated by a company's operating margins and their ultimate appetite for risk. Let's move into Section 3, anatomy of an AI bubble. Okay, I want you to just let this number sink in for a second. $50 billion. According to source estimates, that is the raw capital expense required to build and fully outfit just 1 single gigawatt of compute power. 50 billion. Most companies, even unicorns that are already pulling in billions in revenue, do not simply have $50 billion in cash lying around to fund their future infrastructure needs. It's mind-boggling. So how on earth do they actually afford it? Well, they do it through what used to be called vendor financing. But today, it's taking the shape of these circular deals within the tech ecosystem. Here is exactly how it works. A major hardware or cloud provider wants to sell their chips. They take a massive equity stake, let's say $10 billion, in a really promising AI startup. That startup then turns right around and uses that exact capital to buy chips and cloud space from the very same provider that just invested in them. Now, it temporarily plugs those multi-billion-dollar gaps for the startup, sure. But as experts warn, if these circular deals stack up to hundreds of billions of dollars without real end-user revenue materializing, that creates some deep systemic risk. Now, layer on top of that a really fierce debate happening right now over chip depreciation. And to be clear, it's not about the hardware physically breaking down. A brand new GPU will operationally function for over 5 years. But just 1 year later, its operational life is fine, sure, but its strategic value is totally plummeting. Why? Because faster, cheaper, vastly more efficient chips are continually flooding the market. If your competitor secures the newer chips, your older infrastructure becomes strategically obsolete incredibly fast. And that makes the return on that initial $50 billion investment so much harder to actually secure. And Dario Amodei warns precisely about this dynamic. He flat out stated, "I think there are some players who are yellowing, who pull the risk dial too far. There's an inherent risk of overextension." That's a direct quote. When economic timing is this uncertain, companies feeling the intense pressure to compete might just abandon responsible margins altogether and make wildly optimistic assumptions. This is the exact anatomy of how an economic bubble inflates, and potentially how it bursts. All right, let's pivot to Section 4, the productivity labor shift. So moving beyond just the infrastructure, we're already seeing white-collar domains where AI is absolutely no longer a novelty. It is a serious daily tool for enterprise leverage. We're talking about coding and engineering, where AI is writing entire first drafts of complex code. We see it in scientific and biomedical research, legal services, and even complete end-to-end workflow automation, like insurance claims processing. For business leaders, this presents a really stark choice. Do you use AI to simply cut costs and replace human roles? Or do you use it as a 10x multiplier, making your human workers exponentially more capable and valuable? If leveraged correctly, this translates to some massive macro upside. According to industry analysis, AI has the potential to push annual global productivity growth from its current baseline, which sits at about 1.5%, up to a staggering 5% or even 10% per year. That is a massive, totally unprecedented economic expansion. The global economic pie is going to get significantly, significantly larger. But the really tough question becomes, how do we actually distribute that pie when traditional human labor is fundamentally altered? And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, Policy for a Post-AI Age. On the policy front, we're seeing two major tensions emerge from our sources. First up is national security. There's a very strong argument right now for restricting advanced AI chip sales to authoritarian adversaries, mostly to prevent the creation of highly advanced, AI-powered surveillance states. On the flip side, we have domestic regulation. We're seeing a big push for safety bills, like SB 53, aimed at governing these powerful models. But crucially, these need to be structured with exemptions for smaller startups so we don't accidentally stifle innovation. It's an incredibly delicate balancing act, right? Maintaining an edge abroad while safely managing the risk at home. So, how does society actually adapt to all of this disruption? The sources map out a concrete, staggered timeline with 3 levels of adaptation. Level 1 starts with private sector job leverage. Basically, companies actively choosing to use AI to augment humans rather than just replace them. But as that reaches its natural limit, Level 2 kicks in, requiring major government intervention. Think massive retraining programs and leveraging that 10% productivity growth for broader wealth distribution. And finally, Level 3 forces long-term societal restructuring. And what does that long-term restructuring actually look like? Well, it brings us to this fascinating concept of the Keynesian 15-hour workweek. This is a theoretical, post-AGI future where extraordinary AI productivity actually allows society to decouple basic economic survival from daily, grueling labor. It's a radical, almost sci-fi vision where human activity is driven way more by personal fulfillment and purpose rather than by the sheer necessity of making rent and buying groceries. But, and this is a big but, getting to that utopian future requires navigating some incredible risks today. As Amodei bluntly puts it, if we don't warn about them, we'll just blindly walk into the landmine. This entire explainer is meant to be a strategic warning for you. Whether it's managing a $50 billion capital expenditure bubble or preparing your workforce for absolute structural upheaval, the time to strategize is right now, rather than just reacting when the ground eventually shifts beneath you. Which leads me to leave you with this final, really critical thought. Is your organization actually planning for a post-AGI economy? Are you managing your capital efficiency and your infrastructure bets responsibly? And do you have a real plan for a fundamentally transformed labor market? I highly encourage you to take these insights back to your leadership teams today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning out there.